G'day and welcome back. This is session number 2 of the video version of our Foundations class. The whole point of Foundations is to get the chance to find your feet in the faith, or maybe rebuild the foundations of your life. This is session number 2 where we're going to look at creation and the God who made it. I hope you're ready for that. Great if you've got a notebook and pen and a Bible ready to go there. Just press pause and go and get that if you don't have it. And also great if you've got someone watching this with you and together you're watching, so you can take a moment to discuss the questions that I throw your way. So there you go. You can see behind me on the board here, I've got those 3 words that we looked at last week as well. Space. Here we are trying to carve out some space and some time to think deeply about life and wrestle with the big questions. Journey. These 4 sessions build on top of each other, so they're best done as a set. So I hope you can get to do all 4 in order. And the third one, they're questions. Particularly this week, we're going to talk about the big questions of life. The kind of deep ones that sit in your heart and occasionally bubble to the surface. Sometimes they're big and scary kind of questions. Philosophers call them the existential questions of life. We're going to try and wrestle with the big ones. And let me write up for you on the board what the classic big questions about life are. Here you go. Number 1, who am I? Number 2, where am I? And number 3, why am I here? These are the big ones, or some of the big ones, that will occasionally come to the surface, and you'll find yourself considering these questions. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? And I've got a question for you just to kick off this time together that I want you to press pause and think about. And this is the question. What moments in life get us asking the big questions? What moments in life get us asking these types of big questions? Maybe just press pause and have a little think about what kind of situations arise. Okay, well, what did you come up with? I think the classic things that often cause these big questions to come up are things like, well, it can be anything, can't it? Maybe when you're stressed about a huge amount of study or work, you're thinking, what am I doing? What's this all about? Maybe when you're bored and you find yourself in the silence of the middle of the night where you're alone, or maybe you're in the shower or on the toilet, you find yourself asking some of these big ones. Maybe it's in the midst of a big life decision you're trying to make. What job do I take? Where do I live? Do I get married to this person? When do we have kids, or do we have kids? Or here's the classic one, in the face of death. When you yourself face your own death, or when you lose a loved one. These are the kind of classic moments where we find ourselves pausing in the midst of our busy lives and asking these questions. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? What is this all about? These, I want to put to you, are the big questions of life. Mark Twain, who's a classic American author, has got this quote, and I'll share it with you. He says, the 2 most important days of your life are, number 1, the day you were born. Number 2, the day you find out why. It is so important to find out why you are here. And I'm hoping that you can take this moment to reflect deeply and ask those bigger kind of questions. Often we can be a little stressed when those bigger questions come up, and we find ourselves just staying busy or just distracting ourselves with entertainment so that we don't have to wrestle. But this is a moment to let those big questions come up. And particularly what we're going to do here, obviously, is we're going to ask, how does the Bible answer these big questions? And if you're with us in that previous session, session number one, you'll know why we're going to the Bible to ask about its answers to these questions. Number one, this book here claims to be the word from God to us about life. So this is where we're going to find answers to these questions. And secondly, we looked at why this book is actually reliable, accurate, and trustworthy. If you haven't done session one, you need to go back and have a look at that, because we can have confidence in this book, and we're going to find answers to these big questions. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to dive in and do that right now. And so what I want you to do is open up to Acts chapter 17. Some of you might have already prepared this in advance, but Acts chapter 17, verse 22 through to 34. And we're going to read some scriptures there. And this particular passage is going to help us find answers to these big questions. So you might have that open there in front of you. And I want to just give you a quick little bit of background, bit of backstory here. This book of Acts here is a record of what the followers of Jesus got up to after he died and rose again. And here we have a guy named Paul in the ancient city of Athens standing up in front of a crowd doing a speech. Now, this guy, Paul, used to be an aggressive enemy of Christianity, but he has a radical conversion and now is a passionate believer. He's speaking here in the first century to Greek people in the city of Athens, and he's speaking to a crowd of people who are searching for meaning. They're actually really hungry and keen to get good answers to these questions. And this whole account is recorded for us by the historian Luke, who wrote Luke's gospel about Jesus. This is like part 2 of Luke's gospel. And he records for us here this speech that Paul does. And we'll pick it up there in verse 24, actually. So chapter 17, sentence number 25. Paul stands and he speaks to this crowd, a crowd who are keen to know, really inquisitive. They've got questions about life. And look what he says to them. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. Now, you might not understand, but this is actually a really controversial thing for Paul to say to the crowd that was in front of him. You see, the Greeks in the first century were polytheistic, meaning they believed in hundreds and thousands of gods. In fact, they had gods for all different areas of their life, and they would work hard to sacrifice and do ceremony to many gods. And Paul has just walked through the city of Athens and spotted hundreds of idols to different gods. They're trying to cover all their bases and worship all the gods. And Paul stands up in front of them and he says, you need to hear this. There is a God who is the one true God, who's the God over all the gods. And I want to tell you about him. But this is controversial for them to hear. There is a true God and he's the God of the Bible. And really there are no gods apart from him. This would have been huge for them to hear. He goes on and says, this is the God who made the whole world and everything in it. And therefore, he is the Lord of all that he has made, the whole earth and the whole universe. And he is the one who gives life and breath to everything that exists, including you as humans. And of course, therefore, he is not dependent on us in any way, like your gods and idols seem to be dependent on you sacrificing and doing ceremonies for them. This is huge, what Paul has just dropped on these people in the city. And the way you can actually sketch what he's just said is that picture, one of the pictures we drew last week. So here's the picture of what Paul has just said. He's basically said this: there is a God. There is one true God. And he is the God who made everything that exists. Yep. This is just a picture of the globe that we happen to live on. There's my little dodgy pictures of the globe. He makes everything that exists, including humans, you and I. And because he made everything that exists, he therefore is the Lord of heaven and earth and everything that has been made. This is a sketch of what we've just read there from Paul's speech. Now, what this does is it answers these questions, what Paul has just said. The Bible gives us answers to these questions, and it's just given them to us. So how does this answer these questions? Well, who am I? At a baseline reality, you and I are created beings. Yep, so let me just write that. You and I are created beings. Which is important to acknowledge. You know, we do tend to think pretty highly of ourselves and much of ourselves. But we're told here, no, we've been made by someone else. That's who you are, essentially. You're a created being. And the second question, where am I? Well, if God made it and He's the Lord over it, then really you and I are living in what you might say, God's world. Kind of basic answers to basic questions, but if you let the truth of this reality sink in, it's got massive implications for life. Let me just give you a little snippet of what some of those implications might be. If you are a created being, you didn't make yourself, you owe your existence to someone else, the God who made you. It's actually His life that's running through your veins. And so your life is not simply your own. It's His life entrusted to you for a few short years. So really your life is a gift from God. And He is the one who continues to sustain your life, and He'll keep you alive for as long as He intends to. I think that's pretty big, because we tend to use language about ourselves like this. Well, this is my life, and this is my energy, and this is my talents, and this is my weekend, and this is my holiday. And, you know, we tend to think of ourselves as owners of our own lives simply. But this tells us actually someone else made us, and His life is in us, and we owe our existence to Him. That's pretty huge. Yeah? You're a created being. And secondly, where do you live? Well, you live in God's world. And just think about implications about that. He is the one who owns this world and everything in it, not you or I. So here we are living in His space. Here we are on earth breathing His air, eating His food, using His stuff, living on His land, in His world. That's pretty huge when you let that bubble down, because again, what we tend to do with our lives is think, well, this is my life, and if you ever become an owner of anything, you kind of say, well, this is my property, and this is what I will do with all my things. And God, I think when you hear this, it causes us to sit back and think, actually, my life is a gift, and it's kind of like I'm a guest or a visitor here in someone else's world, the God who made it all. Now that's pretty huge. That's pretty huge. Yeah? I want to get you to just pause now for a minute and just think about an example of that. And I'll put the question up before you hear. What is the difference between walking into your own home and walking into someone else's home? Maybe just press pause and throw that one around in your own mind or with the person who's there with you. What's the difference between walking into your own home or walking into someone else's? Okay, I wonder what you came up with there. When I walk into my own home, I feel like I can do whatever I want. You know, I can sit on the couch and put my feet up on the table. I can open the fridge. I can get what I want. I can do what I want because it's my home. But when I walk into someone else's home, I'll approach, respectfully. I'll knock and come in if they let me come in. I'll leave my shoes at the door if that's the deal here. I don't just walk straight. Wouldn't it be weird to just walk straight into someone else's house without even knocking and just go straight up and open the fridge and get out what you want and eat what you want and leave it around the place and grab their keys and take their car and off you go? You don't do that because you're in someone else's house. It's different from when you're in your own house. Yeah, you behave differently. Your perspective on it is different. Yeah, you're respectful and you honour the place and the person who owns it. And can you see how that dynamic might give you an example of how we ought to be living here in God's world? Understanding that we are created beings who are given life from God and we're living in his world, effectively in his house. Don't you reckon this should give us pause to consider how he would have us live in his world, rather than just making assumptions about how to live and just live according to what we think feels right or makes us happy or we want to do. Can you see how this causes us to ask him, well, God, if this is your world, how would you have me live in it? Now we're going to kind of have a half-time break right now, and you can just press pause and go to the toilet, get a cup of tea, do whatever you want to do. But I wonder whether you could be honest enough to throw around this kind of a question. When you stop and think about the way you live, what you do with your life, if you could be a fly on the wall with your own life, what do you think your life would display or say about what you think about life and the world you're living in? What evidence would there be that you really do understand and believe that this is God's world? And what other pieces of evidence about the way you live, decisions you make, how you spend your time and money and everything like that, what would that be how might that indicate that you may be living disrespectfully in someone else's way? That's a deep, harder kind of question, but I wonder whether you could throw that around in your own mind just for a few minutes, and then we'll come back after a break. Okay, we're back, and we're going to continue with Acts chapter 17, digging into that passage, and we're going to make sure we get an answer to this final question. But just before we do that, I want to do something hopefully a little bit interesting with you. We just kind of have heard from the scriptures that the Bible claims that the world we're living in has been made by God. And that's a pretty big and unique claim. You might notice that we live in a society where it's almost the majority of the world that we live in have got another idea about how this world came to be. And many will believe that really it was just a set of random physical processes that happened over millions of years that without anybody directing it, it just kind of came to be the way it is. And so that's a bit of a different view on how the world came to be, isn't it? Has it been designed by God, or is it just come about really by accident? Random physical processes. I want to play a game with you. It's called Accident or Designed, because I think when you look around at the world we live in, you might see evidence for either of them. And when you look at the world and the world that we're in, what do you see? Evidence of the fact that there's someone who's made this, or simply evidence that it just came about by accident, random kind of chaos? So I'm going to flash some pictures up in front of you now, and you just, wherever you are, you tell me whether this image actually would say to you that the world we're living in is designed or just accidental. All right? Let me flick them through. Here's the first one. Some wildfires. Chaos, carnage. Probably accident, yeah? Just random chaos. Here's the next one. A beautiful sunrise that's got gorgeous colours. Yeah, most people would think, yep, designed. Floods and carnage. Yep, accident. Beautiful looking waves. Maybe some people are scared by that, but I think that's awesome. I think, wow, that's designed. Whenever I see beauty, I think, oh, designer. Yeah. There you go, there's another one. How's that peacock? It's amazing, isn't it? I think fashion designers right through history have just been trying to play catch up with some of what you see in nature. Yeah? Tornadoes ripping through places, you know, random, chaotic, maybe accident. Just a palm frond. Isn't that beautiful? It's just sequence and order, and there's just a shell. There's the beauty of a spiral. You find them on the beach anywhere. I think designed, yeah? Okay, that's a mole rat. That's one of the most disgusting things that exists, and I've got to say, when I look at that, I'm thinking, that just looks like an accident to me. Oh, what about this one? They thought this was a joke when someone first presented a picture of it, but that's actually something called a blobfish, which they found so deep down in the ocean they didn't even know it existed. It looks like my uncle Bob as a fish, and it's hilariously gross. I'm like, that looks like an accident to me. Here's a shell just kind of, you know, cut down the middle, and look at that incredible spiral pattern and sequence. It's insane. It's just a shell. But catch the same spiral in many other items as well. There's just a succulent where you see the same spiral. There's just a pine cone, you see the same spiral. There's a sunflower, same spiral. You can see where I'm going with this. There's actually sequence and pattern to a lot of what we see in nature in the kind of way that is actually quite arresting. Now, some have identified what this spiral actually is, and this is it. That is something called the Fibonacci sequence, which is a series of numbers where you just keep adding together the two previous numbers to get the next number. Fibonacci was the guy who noted this sequence, and this series of numbers, when you graph it into a chart, looks like this. And this is where the spiral sequence comes from. And once you start noticing in nature, you can actually notice it in many places. You kind of scale back and look at bigger things. I mean, on the right-hand side there, that's a fossil of a shell. In the middle, that's a synoptic system, like a weather pattern looking at it from up in space. And on the left-hand side there, that's looking out into space, seeing the same spiral everywhere. It's quite phenomenal, I think, when you sit back and look. This place is amazing. It's beautiful. It's got pattern. A lot of when I look at what we see in nature leans me towards thinking someone has designed this. It's got too much detail. Yeah. When you look at the whole of the universe that we live in, this is our particular universe, or solar system, where these are the planets that are circling around our sun, and you see that little blue and green ball on the third ring out. That's us. That's the planet we live on, called Earth. And there's some things about Earth, and I don't mean to geek out on you too hard here, but I find this stuff fascinating. The distance of the Earth from the sun is perfect for human habitation. Any closer, we'd burn up. Any further away, we'd freeze. The speed of the spin of the Earth is the perfect speed, so we don't fly off or get too crushed by gravity. The orbit of the Earth around the sun and the tilt of its axis gives us the seasons for nature to grow and thrive on the Earth. The oxygen levels on Earth are perfect for humanity. But when you look at all these things, you can either think, well, that's just one crazy accident that humans could live on this planet, or you could say, no, someone's designed this planet particularly and designed humans to be able to live on it in the way we do and survive so wonderfully. There's actually so many things you can look at in nature, which I think confirm that there's a designer over all of this. And look, we could go on and on, but I just want to feature that for you and then suggest that the Bible actually says, the world we live in, it's speaking to you about its maker. Here's one example, which I just want to share with you, Psalm 19. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge, which is to say the world we're living in is speaking to us and proclaiming to us and yelling to us about the one who made it and us. You ought to be able to look around and see evidence of the Maker, the Creator. You ought to be able to see his fingerprints on what he has made. And I think if you stop and think for long enough, the evidence will be overwhelming in that direction. So there you go. There's the claim of the Bible. And I think just some evidence from looking around that there is a Maker in this place. There's so much more we could do there, but there's a little snippet of it. We're going to come back to that passage in Acts chapter 17 now, and we're going to be hunting for an answer to this final question. You know, the Bible claims that there is a God who made all of the earth and everything in it and us on it, conscious, deep thinking, problem solving humans. Why? Why did he make it? Why did he make us? Well, come back to Acts chapter 17 and we'll pick it up there in verse 26 and we'll get an answer to this question. Verse 26 tells us about the detail and the order that God used when he did make the earth and particularly made humanity. Look at verse 26, or sentence number 26. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. What that tells you is that when God first made humanity, he didn't just scatter a whole bunch of humans at the same time around the globe, give it a spin and just see how they went. No, he started with one man, and from that man brought all the nations to inhabit the earth. He started with a man and a woman, actually, and came up with the idea of marriage and family, which would be the bedrock of society and the growth of humanity around the world. And what we're meant to catch here is that God carefully designs and carefully develops humanity to live on this earth. And we get there reference to that he had, he determined, appointed times and exact locations for when they would live. I mean, that's got an application for you and I. You know, what that means is God intends for every single human to live at a certain moment in history and be in a certain location. So the fact that you exist today in this moment is because God intended for you to be alive on his earth in this moment in history. You are not an accident. No matter what someone may have ever said to you, you are here by intention, by the God who made you. And it's not just in this moment in history, but even the exact location. You may have made decisions to live where you live, but God intended for you to be in this very position that you're in right now, in this moment, as we speak, for his good purpose. And he intended you to be sitting here watching this and in this moment, considering the deep things about life and asking why. So there's the first thing that we catch, is that as we're on our way towards answering that why question, is that God created humans carefully and designed things with intention. And here's the big why. Why does he go to so much trouble to do it in the way that he does it? Sentence number 27. This is the answer. God did this so they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. So why does God make humans? Why does God make you and I the way he has and go to all the trouble to make us the way he has made us? So that we would seek him, reach out for him and find him. There's the answer to why you exist. You are here to know your Maker. That's why. You exist to know God. He made you to be in relationship with him, which is why you've got such deep desires and longings for life to go well, because he made us to be with him in the ultimate version of health in life. God's given you a hunting spirit to actually find him. And your heart will keep asking these questions till it finds the ultimate answer. And the answer to this third one right now of why am I here? This is the answer. It is to know God. which is not just know things about God, but it's actually to know him and be in relationship with him. Friend, that is why you exist. It's to know your Maker, enjoy your Maker, see his purpose for why you exist in him. Yeah? The one who gave you life. Does that make sense to you? You know, maybe it doesn't, but maybe for some of you, as you hear that answer, why do I exist? It's to know God. Maybe there's just something, it just really resonates with something deep down in you. I mean, if there is a God who made us, and there's a sense in which his life flows through us, which is why he's close to all of us, then there ought to be something deep in your conscience that just kind of comes alive when you hear that you exist for your God. It ought to make sense on some level deep down. Yeah? In him we live and move and have our being. That's what it goes on to say in verse 28, doesn't it? You'll just read the next verse as well. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own prophets have said, we are his offspring. So there's the ultimate answer, why you exist. The Bible has given us an answer. You're here to know your God and be in relationship with your God. So how does that happen? We're going to look at a lot more detail over the next few weeks, but basically I want to finish by giving a summary of how it happens. How can we really know God and be known by him and be in relationship with him? Well, verse 29 and 30 and 31 kind of tell us how it works. And here's the deal. There's a sense in which God is not far from any of us, in that he lives, in a sense, in our conscience, but he's done something way more explicit than simply that, which you might argue is slightly subjective. God has actually explicitly come near to us in Jesus, yeah, to seek us and find us and reach out to us. He comes to us through his son Jesus. He enters into human history, which is verifiable, so that you can know God. Yeah, he's not trying to play hide and seek and be hard to find. He makes himself knowable by coming to us in the historical man of Jesus, who lived and died, and the Bible even claims rose again. And if God has done all this, then really the ball is in our court. And this is the man that's referred to by Paul at the end of his speech here. You know, it's almost like his speech starts out nice and affirming, although it's a bit controversial, but it lands really strong. Have a look at from verse 29 there. It says, "Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof to everyone of this by raising him from the dead." The man that Paul is speaking about here is the man Jesus, who died and rose again from the dead and will be the judge of everyone. And God will not overlook ignorance, you know. He's actually calling everyone now to turn and repent. Now, that's a big concept. We're going to talk about that more over the next few weeks. But God is actually calling you, and maybe even in this moment, is calling you to come to him now and put your trust in Jesus. It's actually not okay to go on ignoring God while you're living in his world, entrusted with the life that he gave you. It's actually not okay to be too busy for the one who gave you life. It's not okay to take life from him and then just go and live it without regard for him. You were given life so that you would know God and be in relationship with him. And you will be held responsible and accountable for actually being in relationship with him. Yeah, that's where it lands there. Here's why you exist. You exist to know God. And that can happen through Jesus. And we'll look at some more details next week and the one after. You're here to enjoy the one who made you and to live for him and serve him, and you'll be held accountable for it. He commands everyone to repent, which ultimately means to pivot and actually see purpose in God and why you're here, and reorientate your whole life and reset the foundations of your life on the truth of who God is. There you go. I hope that's helpful. Kind of finish strong there because that passage finishes strong, but I hope you find this helpful, getting the Bible's answers to those three big questions. Next week, here's what you can expect, or next session. I keep saying week because when we do this live, it's every week. In the next session, we're going to be looking at sin and how Jesus fixed it. Yep. And here's a passage for you to read up on to prepare for this next session. Mark 7:20 to 23. If you can get the chance to have a read of that before the next session, that would be helpful. And we'll dive into that passage and the concept of how Jesus fixes this broken place in the next session. Hope you found this helpful. Keep scribbling down your questions and your thoughts. There's no such thing as a dumb one. Dig deep. This really matters to find your feet in the faith. It's been good to have you with us in this moment, and I'll see you at the next session.